Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Top Marketing Challenges, Capturing, Nurturing, and Converting Leads. I'm thrilled to be joined by a distinguished panel of MedTech marketing experts who will be sharing their valuable insights and experiences with us today. Please welcome Megan King, Director of Strategic Product Marketing at Koya Medical, Erik Senior Manager of Digital Marketing at CooperSurgical, and Britton Shinn, VP of Strategic Growth at D2 Creative. And I'm your host, Laura Lentchitsky. This webinar will be available on demand for a limited time, and the recording will be made available shortly after our live session concludes. And lastly, before I allow our panelists to delve into discussion today, let's set the stage with some context on what brought us here today. At the end of 2023, D2 Creative, a MedTech-focused marketing and communications agency, conducted a survey among marketers posing the question, beyond constraints like time, budget, and staff, what do you see as your primary marketing challenge? And the responses were illuminating. Can we pull up the survey results, please? So with over 100 participants weighing in, the top challenge, as you may be able to guess from why we're here, was attracting, capturing, and nurturing leads with 26% of the responses. Following that was creating and maintaining high quality content at 20% and measuring performance and proving ROI at 16%. So Britton Shinn, your team spearheaded this survey. Can you share more about the survey process and your thoughts on the results? Were there any surprises?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Because I'll start by saying, because we work with a lot of organizations, I think that in the MedTech space, we assumed that we knew what we were going to hear back, which was partially true. But we knew that generating leads was really important. And because we're an agency, we're data oriented, we said to ourselves, listen, we have to test this some way. So we put together the survey and, we wanted to find out, are the things we thought coincidence? It's just coincidence that our clients are saying very similar things, or is this representative of the larger MedTech marketing community? So while I had some favorites, I think developing quality content might have been a favorite for me. I can't say we were all surprised, or I certainly wasn't, by what the final results were.
How do you plan on using these findings?
Well, I guess, today might be the most obvious first use of it, right? A webinar series was an idea we had, but certainly, making this information available to people who are our clients, working with them and sharing information in the community around these findings, I think is, what we plan to do with this.
Thanks. I'd also like to ask our viewers, let's pull up our first audience poll, because I want to know what's your biggest marketing challenge. So on the screen, you'll see we've recreated the original survey, and we want to know if your challenges here are going to line up with these results. I have a feeling that they might, because maybe that's why you're here today. And while they're answering, to our other panelists, Megan King, Erik, what do you believe distinguishes attracting, capturing, and nurturing leads as the top challenge over the other options?
Two main reasons, I think. The biggest being that it's, kind of the most important metric that we report on, Great creative, great reporting, all that's important, but a business needs leads and sales to generate. So I know my experiences, that's what the executive team asks me. They don't ask me how good that data looks. Obviously, they want to see it and they want to know about it, but the most important metric they're always asking is about ROI and investment and sales and leads. So from an executive perspective, that seems to be what drives the business. And secondly, it seems to be the one that we also have the least amount of control over. We can make changes to capture better data. We can change our creative. We can work with great agencies to help us with these things. But to generate leads, even if I have the perfect audience and the perfect messaging, if it happens to be the wrong time in their budget cycle, I can't get that lead. So the I don't want to say hopelessness, but the lack of, or somewhat lack of control over getting them and acquiring them, is makes it difficult.
Add to that, I think it's also, there are so many different components to it. I think it's related to that in a lot of ways, but it really incorporates and encompasses a lot of these other components of marketing. Even if you are in the right place at the right time, but you have the wrong content, everything kind of has to gel and mesh together for it to be successful. So I think that makes it a huge challenge.
Do you think that there's anything specific about the industry that makes lead gen more of a challenge?
Yes, the number of participants. If we're doing consumer packaged goods, you just got to go to the person who's making the purchase. In MedTech, you got the physician, the HCP, the value analysis committee, the marketing materials management, and I'm sure I'm missing half a dozen titles that are all involved in making a decision. So you can't just have one message for one person. You have to have a varied approach and varied tactics, and hope you hit them all and hit them well, because to get that final sale and to generate a quality lead, you need to involve all parties.
Let's take a look at how our audience has responded. So not surprising, does seem to be in line with ours. Interestingly enough, we have our two runners up also taking second and third place. I'm curious, are there any other answers on this poll that maybe you didn't expect, like you expected to be a little higher up?
I was going to say data privacy. That was an interesting revelation in this exercise, where we see that it ranked last. Everyone's talking about it, but in the end, 100+ people told us that it was their least important. Actually, Laura, wasn't it lower than other?
Yes.
Yeah. So, so I don't know. I don't want to read too much into that, but I thought it was interesting. That was probably, actually, earlier I said wasn't really surprised. That was a bit of a surprise. Sure.
I mean, if I had to put maybe some words in their mouths, I wonder if it's maybe not the top response, but just something that's sort of always on their mind, but maybe just not number one.
And I'd also like to say, I think that's kind of evolved. Like, again, just speaking from me and my experience, we now have regulatory teams and lawyers and all the different other agencies that kind of handle that and help take that pressure off of marketing. Obviously we're responsible for the execution of the data privacy, but there's significant support from other entities within the company to help with that. So while data protection is very important, I have 3 other departments where it's higher up on their priority list than it is mine. Like, again, regulatory, for example.
Thanks. So let's move on to the next topic. How has lead generation changed in the last 5 years? Are there tactics that no longer work or maybe make less of an impact? Megan, I'll start with your thoughts on this, but I'd like to hear from everybody. But Megan, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think capturing people in the right place at the right time gets more and more complex and more complicated. I think people are becoming more and more open to being nurtured and to being connected with brands. But, now that we have ways to connect with people that we never had before, I mean, we have so much access to people's lives, whether it's, text, email, digital assistants, all these different channels with new ones kind of bubbling up. And I think, finding that right time becomes more and more difficult. So for example, I used to feel like email was kind of a standard way to contact and nurture people. And I viewed texting almost as being kind of spammy, and people didn't respond well to that at one time. But I'm hearing more and more that, if you don't want to kind of get buried in their, mountain of email, that if you're a company or a product that people actually want to connect with and want to be nurtured by, that text might be a way to kind of get above a lot of that noise. So, I think evolving and, reacting to the way people want to be nurtured, I think becomes more difficult and more complex as we have more and more channels to do that.
That's interesting. I wonder how you balance the sort of the tried and true with the, I want to try something new and I want to, take a risk, and maybe it's not successful, but I want to try it out. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I'm a very strong proponent of iterative testing, sort of using kind of that scientific method approach to this. So taking kind of small test groups, small pilot groups, and exploring that with them, where you can not just get the quantitative results, but that you can maybe interact with those people a little bit more and get kind of qualitative feedback and a feel for it before expanding it to everybody or to your whole channel. So whenever I like to experiment with things like that, I'll choose one region or one group depending on the type of communication, and test it and evolve it and learn from it, and then iteratively expand that if it's successful.
Thanks. Erik, what tactics come to mind for you?
The rise of custom marketing. I know that might be a bit cliche. The data that I've seen says that, and anecdotally, my experience shows me that customers don't just expect to see materials from MedTech. They expect it to be pertinent to them. And the research I saw most recently said not only do consumers expect to see custom marketing, but they get frustrated and annoyed when it's not custom. So seeing things that don't pertain to them upset them. And again, working on the medical field, that equally difficult because of the point I made on earlier. So if I'm communicating to a physician, the messaging that's pertinent to them is completely different than to the nurse or the VAC or the purchasing manager. So giving them that nuanced, exact message they need in the channels that they want to hear it at the time they want to hear it, it's becoming more and more finite for what people expect, and more and more difficult to achieve that.
What tactics that make maybe more of an impact now than they did in the last 5 years? I mean, especially in the last 5 years with things becoming much more digital and less in person.
Reaching those people at the right time, the custom communications channel. So, programmatic has been a surprise for me. I've seen the decline of, display banners across the board for back when I first started, just having an animated banner was the pinnacle of technology, and seen a kind of a decline since then. But I've been surprised at the results I've seen from programmatic campaigns that I've been running. It's to me, again, I originally thought like it's more banners, what would make a difference? But it's definitely achieved more than I expected. The campaigns we have that it's a part of have been more successful than the ones where we have done less banner advertising. So it's surprising to me that as banners overall have declined, that programmatic is hitting the right chord.
Interesting. And I'd like to hear what our audience thinks, actually. So let's pull up our second poll, because we want to hear from you on what has been your most effective lead generation tactic. And if you don't see your response there, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. And while we're responding, Britton, let me hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, so we're thinking last 5 years. Well, I don't know if I can qualify that so much, but there are a few things I think they're kind of more high level thoughts I have. One was, I think there's a newfound appreciation in clients we speak to for the number of tactics that have to be involved in a campaign these days. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are, the sales people knocking on doors and attending trade shows was the primary vehicle for developing the business. Now we know that you're doing 10 to 15 different tactics to achieve the same result. The other thing that I've observed is that a lot of clients are being very thoughtful, and Megan made reference to this earlier about testing things, rolling things out, trying them. When they have a formula that works, they'll then apply that to different markets. I think that approach is smart. It allows you to use your budget wisely and then maximize that budget when you finally kind of nail the tactics and the combination of tactics and messaging that works best for you.
Let's see how our audience responded. It's pretty mixed. It looks like something else. Okay, so our number one response, we don't have one, but we've got a tie for number 2 between webinars and events and content marketing.
But something else is,
yeah, actually, yes, everything seems to be getting high responses with the exception of email marketing, interestingly.
Or email.
Email, though, has, Megan referred to this earlier, but it's also been more challenging for email marketing with purchasing lists and making sure that they can be uploaded and used properly with, again, data regulation and compliance and privacy and all of that stuff. So I don't want to ask if email is dead, because I feel like that's an old clickbaity headline. But actually, let me ask a general question about not email marketing, but we did get a write-in from before the show started, a general question about trade shows and other in-person events. How has their role in your lead generation strategy evolved, and what have you noticed any change in their effectiveness?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. We participate in quite a few professional trade shows. So, the way we approach these shows is really quality of interaction. So, whenever we go to these events, we don't, rely solely on, chance that people will come by our booth and participate. I think, we make sure that we leverage the tools that are available to us beforehand. So a lot of these, conferences will provide attendee lists ahead of time. So, really using those as much as possible to see who's going to be there, review it ahead of time, and really make valuable connections when you're there. As many opportunities as you get that you can set up time with a person to either do a demo or talk through one-on-one, in addition to, what you may be doing at the booth, is just going to make that, I think, more and more valuable and create a stronger and stronger lead as you leave that event. You're much more connected at that point.
Yeah, and to touch on to what Megan said, I found ancillary activities help too. So, if you're at a trade show and they offer labs, or if they offer sponsoring different talks, we found that that getting those, some people who might not normally step out, walk the trade show floor and go to the booth are more likely to interact with the company there. So expanding your reach at the show by doing those secondary or ancillary activities has helped with lead generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Britton, from an agency perspective, has the ask for trade show support changed in relation to this?
I'd say not entirely. I think there's people are looking for different things, or organizations are looking for different things, but the trade show is still a core component of all of our clients' strategies. What we find, I think, in our space, we're often creating, experiences for those trade show. So the things we're doing on the tactical side might be to build out an interactive experience, demonstrate the product in the booth. However, as you know, Laura, we're also developing campaigns for pre and post event, communication with clients. But I think ultimately, maybe years ago, I thought trade shows would, especially during the pandemic, that they were kind of done. But they're back, and our clients are using them like they had in the past. I think, I guess one other note I would make is that organizations are regularly looking for ways to reduce costs. So if they happen to be an organization that has devices that are significant in size, and they're maybe harder to move around, they're usually looking for alternative ways and engaging ways to get people who are on the floor to view those products.
Thanks. Let me ask a bit about your, I guess, thinking beyond the last 5 years, but just your experiences within your current roles. With our next question, how have your current roles within your respective organizations changed the way that you think about lead generation? Erik, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So there's two things that come to mind with this. First is, always to remove myself from the equation. One thing I've noticed is a lot of marketers make decisions based on what they think best and what they would like and how they would act, in terms of which channels to go through or what creatives to go with, and forget about we're not the customer. With MedTech and B2B in general, we're very different than the end user who's going to use these products and services. So if you can get some research, that's always ideal, but try not to rely on anecdotal evidence or personal experience to be the be all end all. I mean, obviously, if you don't have anything else, that's where you have to go, but try to remember we're not the customer and try to see ourselves in those shoes. And the second piece was the rise of custom marketing, as I touched on before. The fact that people are expecting to see these things when they want to see it, when they want to see it, has definitely made a significant change.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, Megan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. And for me, my company is a more early stage company. We're a bit small, so we're a small team internally. So there are only a couple people full time. So I think it really is all about optimizing the resources that you have, and also partnering with agencies. So making sure you're optimizing that time and leveraging those skills to make up for maybe what you don't have internally. So that you're not kind of duplicating efforts. But I think really, like I said, quality over quantity in a lot of cases. So making sure that what you're getting from it are, strong leads, well-nurtured leads, that it's not just kind of a lot of noise and, a huge funnel that you don't have the resources to then, work with and process through. So it's a little bit of a different approach for a smaller business.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that ties into something that Erik mentioned earlier about just the importance of lead generation as proof of success, I'd say. The other metrics tend to take a second and third and fourth place, but are there other metrics that now maybe carry more weight or can act as the consolation prize if the lead generation is a little lacking at the end of the campaign?
So one piece of kind of a tangential way of getting there, but I think one piece of research that helped us was understanding how many touch points a customer needs before making that final decision. The general consensus that, hey, whatever the last piece of marketing collateral, wherever that lead comes from, is the most important. But I've seen external research and internal company research showed, our internal research has shown that the average consumer is touched by 4 to 5 different marketing pieces before they make that final decision. So when trying to, sometimes people forget that, but having to reinforce them and saying, hey, we might not have gotten leads through this banner or through this email or through this, piece on the website, but all of these combine to helping the person make the decisions. It's important to remember, kind of contrary to what I said before, is as consumers, we don't just see one thing and make a purchase. If I see an ad that's interesting, I'll go look at a website, or I might hesitate, but then I'll see a banner that reminds me of it. And MedTech and B2B buyers are the same. So we can't just rely on wherever the lead comes from as the key to that campaign. So having that data and having to reinforce it every time someone asks me about ROI in a particular campaign has been very helpful.
We have an audience question. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I was, supporting that Eric's statement there. And what I had seen in the past is that organizations might pick a tactic, the tactic they attributed the success to, and then focus exclusively on that, sort of tuning out the fact that, like Erik said, 4 or 5 other things you did are what influenced the final, action on that part of that client. And so, making sure that people in the organization are aware that all of these things work together. This is there's an ecosystem of communication, and that needs to be maintained. And then we shouldn't, cut out 4/5 of our tactics because we see that, the email is the thing that actually leads to the conversion.
Thanks. Why don't I get to this question from the audience? What strategies do you recommend for nurturing leads over a longer sales cycle?
I would suggest, things that are sort of educational and that are adding value to the customer. So, as it's, kind of going through that longer cycle and maybe you have more touch points, I think being able to add value through things like, webinars or, things that are actually educating them, providing knowledge that they didn't have before, I think adds a lot over a longer period of time. So it doesn't start to feel, spammy. It's not repeated, purely sales related contacts. You're making sure that you're kind of building that bond and building a relationship and, trust with them. So I think that would be, the way I would suggest going about a longer sales cycle.
Yeah, and again, just to parrot what Megan said, customer relationship context in between those sales contexts is the best way. Not only trying to sell them the product, but you're trying to sell the company as well, and reminding them that, hey, we're not just here to sell you, we're here to support you, we're here to help you with, your billing or your other products and other things. Having those different message points through the sales cycle, A, adds content along a longer sales cycle, but B, reinforces that, we're partners in this to get it through it together.
Thanks. Let's move on to actually our next topic, because I wanted to circle back on some personalization with the expectation for personalized content and experiences being higher than ever. So with our next question, Megan, why don't I start with you? What insights can you share on how tailoring your tactics and messaging does or maybe doesn't drive effective lead nurturing?
Yeah, I think tailoring, like we said before, is, very, very obviously important and critical now more than ever. To echo what Erik had said, people, they kind of get agitated or annoyed if you're not serving the right information at the right time. I would say that we, really do, kind of going back to that scientific method that I hinted at before, whenever we're trying to, personalize or customize or find the right combination of tactics or communication, I go about it by kind of just changing, one thing at a time, or maybe possibly 2 things at a time, so that you can identify, what component made the difference, so that you're not just, kind of trying whole new batches of approaches all at once. So you can kind of get to a, final product at the end where you're saying, okay, this type of person is reacting most positively to, this image or this specific phrase. And it gives you the opportunity to really slice that data and take a look at, what's working with what types of people. And, at the end of the day, customize and create this unique content for the different segments that you've been able to identify.
Thanks. Erik, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So the most successful campaign I've had recently in terms of response rate was based on a very specific message. So tailoring that message to your audience can have all the difference in the world. So we had a product, disposable speculum, again, a commodity product, I'd argue. But it had, as a differentiation factor, we incorporated a feature to have a click-free design. Thought being, hey, being stirrups and having a speculum is a very stressful event, and removing that audio sound, can make it a more relaxing experience. Through a conversation one of our reps had at a trade show, we found out there's a subsect of nurses called SANE nurses, sexual assault nurse examiners, or forensic nurses. And obviously they deal with very, very tense and difficult situations. And by targeting this audience with that message, we saw, again, I want to say something like 60% response rates, because while this throwaway benefit for our larger audience wasn't there, this was exactly what they need in the exact situations they needed. So by having that one benefit as the key message and tailoring the communications around that, we saw incredible response rates. It's a smaller niche segment of our product portfolio, but we found a intensely interested audience by just, again, changing the messaging to this one particular benefit.
Yeah, that's a great win. I'm curious, and I'll open this up to anybody on the call. But when the stars don't align and you don't get that kind of luck, and you're working on your audiences and you're customizing messages, how do you balance personalizing your messages and tailoring them to your audience segments with scalability when implementing your lead nurturing campaigns? So how do you know when to stop?
So I'll start. Data. It is the most valuable commodity in the world. The level of data you have tends to necessitate that. Ideally, I'd like to know where every person's going to be at the exact time and have it, the email waiting for them as soon as they get there. But we don't always get there. So I'd say, knowing the different segments, knowing your audience, doing that analysis necessarily before you start your campaign, and again, knowing what information you can have to make those decisions helps direct how much and how frequently you should communicate with them. So. Again, knowing that we're targeting these three audiences, this is how they do it. If you're able to do some research beforehand, even better. But just data, I'd say data availability directs customization.
Yeah, and I would add to that, even if you don't have, the incredible success that you were hoping for on a particular campaign, hopefully you've set that up in a way that you've at least walked away with it with a lot of learnings, things that are actionable, that you can implement in the next round. So I think it's important that you take a look at the way you're setting up these campaigns, so that it's in a way that, even if you don't quite get what you're hoping for, you've got what you need to improve it on the next round. So.
We have another audience question that I think I'll throw to your way first, Britton, because it's about budgets, and I feel like you maybe see a range of them with the clients. Okay. How can smaller companies compete in lead generation against larger competitors with bigger budgets?
Well, it's just interesting question. So yes, that's a common problem or concern. My own experience is, many years ago, I started an e-commerce business, and one of the greatest challenges was my business had no money to compete, for customers' attention. But what I found back then was this little thing called Google was really going to help me, get around that problem. And I think that, so I would take that back to when working within a budget, which everyone does, both agency side and on the client side. I would suggest that working with an organization that helps you identify the tactics are going to be most effective based on what you're trying to do, and what audiences are most likely to respond to. So we know that there are certain tactics that are maybe harder to get off the ground. Say, for example, search engine optimization, right? If you're going to optimize the content on your website so that you attract more people who are searching for the things you offer, products and services you offer. That's going to be a slow process, and it's going to be a lift up front, and it may take several months before you see much in the way of results from that. But the cost for that of that versus spending a lot of money advertising and putting ads in front of people, like Erik was mentioning earlier, and Megan, those ads tend to perform not as well or suboptimally to search engine optimization tactics. So I think budgets are going to play a key role in discerning what things you work with. But then I come back to my point maybe earlier, which is I think you need to consider lots of tactics and perhaps do in varying degrees and use multiple things so that you can you can sort of see that there's an ecosystem of things that you need to do rather than relying on a single tactic.
Megan or Eric, do you have any perspective to share?
I would add to that, I think whenever you are kind of a smaller business and, you don't have the massive budget, I think it's, kind of taking that perspective that you're not going to be able to boil the ocean and you don't need to. So I think it's really being selective about, where you choose to, play, who you choose to go after, and how you choose to do it as well. Maybe in some areas you're not going to be able to compete. Maybe the large company, the large corporation has that market, really unlocked and has it saturated, and you can't dump enough into it to overcome that. But if you can find areas where they aren't quite putting as much into it, and you can really get a foothold there, I think it's just kind of understanding where you can have the most impact and getting the most out of your dollars for what you have.
I think those are great points.
Yeah, I'd say the success I've had has been narrowing my audience. Instead of, again, just personal experience, instead of looking for all OBGYNs, maybe focus on a specific subspecialty that I can target them with 4 or 5 tactics, but still hit like a $2,000 budget. Again, Google to parrot Britton, Google ads have been SEM ads have been the most effective tactic. So to pair that with a couple of banners and a couple emails and just narrow in on a smaller audience, but maybe one that is underserved or that is more engaging, you can see some success against a larger, more richer competitor.
Actually, I want to just agree with both of you and Eric and Megan, because that I think is a really, I should have said that too. I think that's a really good point. Really identifying, where do you need to be? You don't need to, like Megan said, boil the ocean, right? Find who really needs your product and whose life can be improved by having your product, whether it's an HCP or a patient, and focus on them. In the end, that will be, you'll have most benefit out of that, most return from that investment than trying to market to everyone and spread yourself maybe too thin.
Let's talk more about technology and lead generation. I've noticed that we're witnessing a rapid rise in available marketing technology solutions, including automation and AI and campaign targeting and managing platforms and reporting and analytics that can all enhance lead generation efforts. So my next question to the panel is, how do you adapt lead generation strategies to leverage the latest technologies and trends? Erik, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So I think the important thing when trying any new technology is, and I believe Megan touched on this earlier, is to eliminate variables. So if you have good messaging, if you have good creative that you've seen success and you're going after the same audience, try to keep that there. You don't want to reinvent the wheel for everything. A lot of the new technologies have leveraged existing things. So I mentioned programmatic earlier. It's fancy ways of getting banners out there, marketing automation or target nurturing, email campaigns. So if you already have an effective creative approach and strategy and messaging, leverage what you know should work, and that helps mitigate variables. And then it's much simpler to add in the different variables that this new technology brings. So focus on successes, and then again try to eliminate variables.
Do you have tactics where you tend to see that it's easier to automate responses or conversations or things like that versus others where you really need to have more of a hands-on approach, more of a human touch?
I haven't seen that from a tactical perspective. I'd say more of an audience perspective. I'd say different audiences require different levels of that. But maybe I'm speaking a little too clearly. Nurturing campaigns, marketing automation, it's kind of handled all the same way. It's just what you send and how you send it and when you send it's different depending on your target.
And Megan, I may have cut you off before, please.
Oh no, you're fine. I was just going to add, I think, if you look at where they are in the, sort of nurturing funnel, and, my example I want to mention is kind of after they have adopted the product and you're continuing to nurture their usage, we had evaluated using text messaging for communication with them because, we've learned that that's effective in a lot of cases. But we also have a mobile app that they were using and that could use. And, we looked at ways, okay, do we add texting as something additional, or do we leverage the channel that we already have with, things like push notifications through the mobile app, and really kind of trying to keep that, within the ecosystem. And, really at the end of the day, it can be a similar type of communication, and it's a similar way of reaching them, but it kind of keeps them, within, and we get that feedback loop for the data as well. So I was just going to add that.
We actually have another poll for our audience, if we could pull that up, because I'm interested in hearing how much of your lead generation pipeline is automated. So go ahead and put your answers in. And actually, Britton, while people are voting, I wonder if you have anything to add.
Sure. I think something that's important to consider is, even on the agency side, we're always consulting with other vendors, right? There's too much stuff to know. They're used, 10, 15 years ago, maybe you had to know a couple of things. Now you have to know 30 different things. You have to know about search engine optimization. You have to know about email marketing. You have to know about landing page optimization. You have to know, on and on and on. So I found personally, and I think this would be a recommendation to anyone, is look for experts, maybe multiple experts, and let them share with you what they have, especially when you're talking about adopting platforms. It's just a great way, trust these organizations, and if they're doing a good job, you'll probably have, that's probably how come you found them. They're probably making information available to you that educated you enough to go forward and take that step and say, yes, I'd like to talk to someone about your product. But that I think is something that everyone needs to be comfortable that we can't know everything, and that it's okay not to know everything, and then there are plenty of people out there who can help you.
So it sounds like vendors being a good resource for staying up to date. I wonder from our other panelists, do you have any other suggestions on what resources you go to, or people that you turn to, or network with that help you stay up to date on the latest technologies and trends?
So I think there's a lot, the same way we get information for everything else has definitely helped me with technology. I know there's social media groups that I follow that help me keep on the cutting edge. I know, leveraging partners like D2 has been exceptionally helpful in learning things that I haven't had. Certain associations like the AMA, they still send out good information, and even things like I took a LinkedIn learning course earlier today that was incredibly helpful in terms of just experts telling me the details of certain things that I'm not as up to date on. So I think having a varied and wide net to look into all these things, you'll eventually get there. I don't think anyone's perfect, but I think to Britton's point about being an expert in everything, you have to have a whole slew of resources available to help stay on top of it.
Right. Let's take a look at the results of the poll. Okay, so it looks like about half have said partially automated. I know that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but open question to the panelists is: do you think that there's a place? Where do you think that the ideal place to be would fall as far as automation versus more manual processes?
I think partially automated makes the most sense. I mean, it's again, research we've conducted shows it's cheaper and easier to convert existing customers, and that could be done automated. But that's a saturation point. You're going to need to get some, cliched boots on the ground and people out there and bring on new blood. And I have not found, effective automated ways of getting those new clients. It tends to be a little more automated and needs a little more customization. So I think partially automated is the best approach.
Yeah, I agree, especially in our industry. I think that's probably not the case for a lot of other industries, but I think for, MedTech or the medical device industry, where this is something that, has such a huge impact on people's lives, and it's something that they really are evaluating very deeply based on, again, the place it's going to have for them, the impact that it's going to have for them. I think going too far into automation with this industry, you kind of lose that personal touch and you lose that connection. And I think it's hard to maintain that. But, I think it makes perfect sense to have some degree of automation. And that way you don't have an army of, 500 people that are, manually having to, work with all of these leads. So I think even using automation as kind of an initial, screening process or a sorting process so that how to take the next step I think it makes sense to automate that portion, but then maybe, treat people with more personalization after that. So
We have another audience question. What are your recommendations for how marketing and sales should work together in lead gen? I feel like this is a classic. Some organizations, I feel like marketing and sales could be like cats and dogs, and sometimes it's very cohesive. So eager to hear your thoughts on this one.
So I'll take a first step. My company, we've had a change. When I first started here, it was definitely us first them approach. It was on the marketing side, we always never got the credit and always took the blame, is the way we looked at it. But we've found, through management changes, that working with the sales team has helped. I mentioned the importance of messaging before earlier, and the sales team, they're out there, they're talking to customers, they get insights that I can only see at a 10,000-foot level if we conduct research. That being said, I remember it's anecdotal evidence and it's data points, but to collect enough from the sales team can definitely help create effective messaging and communications channels. Every sales rep thinks their particular client and customer is the exact one. Remembering that it is anecdotal and not to be the be all end all, but it's definitely helpful in determining again where and when and what to say.
yeah, and I would add to that, again, working with sales is very important, and really the value of that works for both ways. I mean, if we're out here generating leads that the sales team can't act on, or that they don't find valuable or actionable, then you're generating leads that, ultimately go nowhere. And, kind of that feedback loop then is, if you're learning this from them, that these leads that you're generating, kind of aren't going anywhere, you can learn why that is. And it can help you, kind of segment and adjust your targeting if you see kind of how those ultimately, flow the whole way through the channel once it gets to them, and what kind of responses they're getting. So I think working together is very important to create value for both sides.
Thanks. So I have one final question for our panelists. And it's, what lead generation strategy or tactic do you think that MedTech should leave behind in 2024? And what should it embrace? Britton, why don't we start with you for this one?
Okay. I have three things I think people should leave behind. This was sort of a fun one to think about. This idea of one size broadcast messaging, I think that one's got to go. And I know everyone says, oh, that we don't do that. But the reality is that's still a large portion of the marketing and communications that happen today. Another thing I would say is doing things because you've done them before. Erik mentioned before that clients, our customers, audience, whatever you want to call them, they have higher expectations than ever before. They don't want to be sold the same way. They want more information. They want more value. They want a relationship. They want a trusting partnership. So just because you've done things before doesn't mean you should keep doing them all the time. I think you should think about that. And finally, picking a tactic that you don't like or you haven't seen success with that that hasn't been supported. So I mentioned this a couple of times already today, but this idea, this concept of an ecosystem, right? Multiple tactics, multiple touch points, singling out a single tactic and saying it doesn't work if it wasn't previously or actively supported by other tactics, I think can be a mistake. And I've seen that happen too, where people will dismiss tactics outright, and they haven't considered it didn't work because they purchased a list that was not very good, and they sent a lot of emails to a lot of people and got no response, and then they would immediately, decide email is not a component of our marketing going forward. And I think that it should be, but I think it has to be tempered and considered in a larger context. Oh, and what would I embrace? I would embrace tailored messaging, or Erik's referred to custom marketing. I think that you have users, influencers, purchasers. Everyone has something specific that's important to them. And you need to understand those things. So that I can put that right up top, figure out what it is that your audience needs and then communicate to them on those terms. And then I think you will have a much more meaningful relationship with those people.
Thanks. Megan, what do you think?
So I'm going to echo Britton in some ways here. I would say things that we should leave behind is, not adapting, not evolving, not embracing, new technology or, new methods of reaching people. Like I said, it seems like every day there's kind of a new way to communicate with someone. There's a new, tool that people have, adapted into their lives. So I think we need to continue to be open to using those and to learning about them as it happens. And then for what I would embrace, I would say, relationship marketing, education. So more of those sort of value added things like webinars, pamphlets, anything that you can do to, add value as a business beyond just, pure marketing communication, I think will become more and more valuable, especially in this industry.
Erik, your thoughts?
So I want to preface my answer by saying I'm a digital guy, and I know my answer is going to upset some of my non-digital colleagues and has in the past, but I'd say print. Again, I might just because I'm digital. I know a lot of the publications I used to work with are no longer around. A lot of the ones that we do continually work with have gone to digital only, and the cost needed for them to sustain themselves had made ads go up. So we're reaching fewer people for more money that I could do 7 or 8 digital tactics with that I was doing a print ad with. So selfishly, I'd say get rid of print and give it more to digital. And to that end, what I would encourage is, again, parroting Megan and Britton, CRM and custom marketing. I touched on this briefly before. So we found through data it's a lot more effective if you can grow your existing customer base than going out and finding new customers who know less about you and you have to onboard and bring everything together. So if you're able to, target the right messaging, know what additional products that you can leverage to say, hey, you like X, you might like Y and Z. We found that to be incredibly cost-effective method to grow business, and it's scalable. We're talking really about what can automate and what we can't automate. At least for us, hey, if you have a person who's buying X, that they might be interested in Y and Z. So that custom marketing, that relationship building marketing would be something I definitely want to invest more in.
Well, thank you all. Before we end, actually, I'd like to open the floor to our panelists for any closing remarks. If you'd like to say anything additional before we conclude. And actually, Erik, why don't I come right back to you?
Nothing closing remarks prepared, but again, go digital. Let's get away from print.
Yeah, closing remarks. Again, nothing prepared, but I would say, really quality over quantity in a lot of cases. So, really looking at who, you're bringing in and who you're nurturing and how, rather than just kind of a massive funnel is what I would recommend.
Britton, how about you?
I think something I always try to keep in mind, and it's probably something I've already said, but I always come back to this idea of what does your audience need, and what can I or what can my organization offer them? I think that having that mindset when you're thinking about communications, I think it will help you choose thoughtfully and carefully what you put together, because you're really thinking about how can I help somebody, make their life easier, their day easier. How can I make their business or practice more efficient? And how can I help, in the case of MedTech, their patients get healthier, right? I think if you think about that and then all the things you're trying to put together, if you stay in that vein, I believe you'll connect and with those audiences, and then you will develop a relationship that has a little more meaning than if you were just to, just try to sell them on features of your product or something like that, which is too often the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this being the top response for our survey and the top response for the people in the audience today just makes this topic very, very timely, very top of mind for a lot of people. So thank you so much for everybody for joining us today for this great discussion. I'd like to extend a very special thank you to our panelists, Erik Herz, Megan King, Britton Shinn, for sharing all of your valuable expertise and experiences with us. And to our audience members, we appreciate your participation and engagement throughout the event. If we did get to your questions today, we'll follow up with you afterwards. And if you've missed any part of today's webinar or want to share it with a colleague afterwards, we'll be sending out a link to the on-demand replay, along with an infographic of our survey findings with more insights too, and some other exclusive offers that you won't want to miss. So thank you all once again for being a part of today's webinar.